Hey, everybody. How's it going? Frank Berry with Tithely coming to you live with another episode of Modern Church Leader. Super excited about today's guest, kind of a longtime friend now for a couple of years, and really focused on church planning in a certain part of the church. So we're going to talk all about church planning in a pandemic and even coming out of pandemic. But don't worry, if you're not just church planning, we'll also touch on kind of resources for churches, getting back, meeting together, and kind of doing things in real life again. So with that said, let me bring in our guests. Mike, how's it going today?
Hey, good, Frank. Good to
see you too. We're both rocking the Tithely swag today. Love
there
it.
Is.
That's a special edition right there from the very first Tithely launch event. So love that.
Thank you. I was a part of it.
So man, it's good to, we talk all the time and see each other. We were just at the CMN conference. What was it, a month ago now? Probably a little less. But we've never had you on the show, so I'm pumped to talk about church planning.
It's an honor, honestly, and I've seen the show a bunch, so it's a big honor, Frank. Appreciate what you and the Tithely family do for church leaders and for churches all over the world, actually. So thank you so much. And it's a real honor to be on.
Oh man, it's fantastic. Well, our partnership with the AG and with CMN and all the other things that come with it, even Convoy of Hope a little bit now. So it's been a fantastic partnership, and just, we've all become good buds, which has been awesome. So man, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and what you do? Like, what's your job? Who do you work for? And what's the organization do?
Yeah, good. So I am the Director of Funding and Partnerships for a group called the Church Multiplication Network, which is the church multiplication and planting arm of the Assemblies of God. The Assemblies of God is the fourth largest denomination in the world. It's the largest Pentecostal denomination in the world. And for short, we call it CMN, Church Multiplication Network. And so that's what CMN stands for. And CMN, along with other friends, church planning organizations, around the country, like ARC and the Sin Network, and there are tons of other ones, and we're all good friends because we're all working for the same cause. We want to see new churches, healthy churches in every community, especially in America.
Yeah. Amen. And you guys have been, how long has CMN been in existence?
We were formed in 2008.
Okay.
So we've been around for a little bit. We've in that time, we have just surpassed 4,500 new churches since 2008. Wow. We've funded to the tune of nearly $20 million to new churches. And it's raised up thousands of leaders. For every church plant nowadays, back in the day, we called it pioneering new churches. And sometimes that's because you went out all by yourself. But nowadays, we don't teach to going out and doing it the Lone Ranger. We teach to a team. So you can imagine, out of 4,500 churches that have been planted, how many thousands of team members are a part of that?
Yeah. How many churches? So you said you launched in 2002?
2008.
2008. So 2008 that's 13 years. Yeah. 4,500 churches. That's a lot of churches every year.
It's a lot of churches. So we average about 300 churches a year.
That's like 346 with the math I just did. So that's incredible.
What's really interesting, I know today you wanted to talk about church planning during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know this, but we still planted churches last year in 2020. In fact, we planted about 240 churches last year.
Man.
In 2020 during the pandemic. The churches looked a lot different. There weren't in-person launches, but really we thank God for, God still calling leaders to plant churches and still equipping people to plant churches. We only missed one training last year. So we're pretty optimistic about the future.
Yeah, that's amazing. So before let's kind of take one quick step back. What does it normally look like to plant a church? Like, give us the 2-minute overview of how CMN and probably, presumably ARC and others all have a similar kind of model. I'm sure there's some differences on the edges, but just how does an organization like CMN help a church go plant? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it all starts with the leader. So God calls the leaders, we don't. And so when God calls a leader and those leaders come to us, every church planting organization, we essentially do three things. We equip, fund, and network them with other church planters and places. So when we equip them, we train them generally toward best practices of planting a church. Of course, best practices only come about after you've done something for a lot of time. And so we have best practices. We have, when you come through a CMN launch training, you're going to get the 13 qualities, the 13 the 13 things that every church planter needs to launch strong. Now, we're a little bit different in some because we don't necessarily have a set template that you have to follow. We help people launch in a coffee shop. We help people launch online. They launch a campus, and then they launch big box churches as well. So we do a little bit of all of that. So we equip them, we fund them. And so we're fortunate enough to be able to actually provide matching funds to our churches.
Yeah, that's cool.
Not all of them take matching funds, but those that need it do. And so every church planting organization does that in some way, shape, or form. And then we network them. And the network piece is really cool because we're on this call right now because we have a relationship. If we didn't want to be around other people and want to network, we'd just all be doing things alone. But this, Frank, you've got a ministry background, even in Tidely now, you never do ministry alone. Don't do that. It's not the right thing. You're going to, if you do it alone, burnout's sure going to happen because you have no one to lean on and lean into when you go through tough times. And so that's what that networking piece is.
Yeah. And how long does it take to plant a church? What's that? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? What's the lead up look like?
It just all depends. We have people that come in ready to go and they can plant I've seen people plant in 9 months. They train in January, they launch in September. It depends. If you're going to do what we call parachute in, so it means you've never lived in this location. You're in San Diego, Frank. I've never lived in San Diego.
Right.
But if I parachuted into San Diego and wanted to plant a church there, there's no way you would tell me, oh, you can do it in 9 months. No, you'd say it's going to depend where you live. Right. And you should live there for a while. You got to get to know the people. And so all of that takes place. If somebody is from that area, they already live there. And for whatever reason, maybe the church, their church that they're a part of is launching another campus, that can happen fast. But 9 months to about 2 years.
Yeah. It feels like if a church is already in an area and they're growing and they're going to launch another campus or do a plant kind of out of a church, that's almost a different ball game. Because
absolutely,
there's kind of support and I'm sure training and resourcing, and there's a network already there, and maybe some of the people go to the new plant. There's a lot of mechanics there. It's much different if you're just starting something brand new. You're either parachuting in, or even potentially maybe you live there, but you're starting a new church somewhere else, in another community of the area, kind of thing. That
depends on the context.
Yeah.
We say that all the time. It just depends on the context.
And you guys provide a lot of training, leading up to in this 6 or 9 or 12 or 24 month period. There's a lot of training. I've been at one that you held in San Diego. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the training that people get.
Yeah, our training's about a 3-day event. You come, we go through all of the teaching sessions, and you're assigned a coach. That coach walks with you all the way until you launch, and then you're a part of the network at that point. So it's really a great thing. Last year, we saw, so we launched 240 churches last year, but we trained about 250 brand new, what we call them projects, because every project is comprised of a group of leaders. And so we trained about 250 projects. So that's basically how we know what's coming in church planning for the next year.
Right.
To see how many people have trained through that. Yeah. So they're awesome trainings.
Yeah.
And let me just say, if anybody's watching today and you feel like God's possibly calling you, if you've thought about planting a church before, feel free to reach out to us, churchmultiplication.net. And listen, you don't have to be a part of the Assemblies of God. You can be from any variety of faith, background, we'll point you in the right direction because we want to see God's kingdom grow and multiply. Here's what's really interesting, Frank. If you look across all denominations, which I know you guys have got a big following, we have to do a better job in the church at planting new churches. On average, about 4,000 churches a year across the U.S. close every year. Wow. And if you take all the church planting organizations and denominations and add up how we're doing, pre-pandemic, we're only opening about 4,000 churches a year. So it's net even, right. Net zero, at the end of the day. And we've got to grow. We've got to, keep finding new communities. There are 15,000 to 20,000 communities in the U.S. that have no church whatsoever. A lot of people don't know that. You think, oh, there's a church on everything, but there are small rural communities, no church whatsoever. So we have to keep doing a better job at that. Yeah. We've all got to work together.
Look, we got people. I just saw a note. Where did this go? Mark Penman tuning in from Glasgow, Scotland. So we got people from all over the place. So by the way, hi to Mark. And I would love to know, there's a bunch of people watching. So let us know if you've planted a church, right? If you are a church planter, or if you're thinking about planting a church. Like, we'd just love to know what's on your heart and kind of who's tuning in, kind of who's engaging with this session. So pop it in the comments while we're chatting here. So Mike, talk to us a little bit about like planting during COVID. You planted 240, 250 churches. Clearly before COVID, I'm sure it was you're renting schools, you're finding different facilities, and these plants are happening. Maybe it's in people's homes, things like that. But then COVID hits. How did you guys adjust and plant 240 churches during the pandemic when everything was shut down?
We learned a lot of lessons, Frank. And I think everyone that has a hand in the church succeeding learned a lot of lessons through COVID. A lot of our churches launch portably. They set up and tear down each and every week. Yep. And then all of a sudden, schools closed.
I know. We meet in school. The church I've been going to for years, we meet in schools and
listen, we recommend schools and theaters for people to launch in.
Yep.
Portably, because we don't recommend people buy buildings when they first start. Right. So launch portably and go after a school, go after a theater in town. Well, Frank, theaters and schools closed.
Yep.
So what are you going to do? You can't meet. So everyone started scrambling. And I think the first lesson that we learned that we hadn't done before, it was a part of our training, but now it's like the first part of our training. And that is innovation in digital tools. Everyone made a mad dash. They paused what they were doing, and they made a mad dash to set up streaming services.
Yeah,
streaming from their living rooms, streaming from wherever space they could find. They started streaming. Well, Frank, we never taught to that in our training. We never taught it. We didn't. I mean, we could point people in the right direction about who to talk to.
It was kind of an afterthought, like, hey, we got some resources, you can go check this out. But it wasn't the main
digital tools and online services were an afterthought. They're the first thought now. Yeah. They have to be, because it insulates you from this. The reality is COVID's probably not the last global pandemic we're ever going to have. Mm-hmm. That's the reality.
Right.
And so we were amazed at how many churches were not set up to navigate through this. Yeah. We thought everyone was doing it. No, a lot of times it was an afterthought.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that's interesting, I get this question a lot, Mike. How many churches closed during the pandemic because of finances? I get that question all the time.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the Send Network, which is the sort of the Southern Baptist arm of church planting. They're good friends of ours. Them and a couple of other church planting organizations did a broad survey about how many churches would close, and only about 6% out of about 1,600 churches surveyed, only about 6% said that they might have to close because of the pandemic. And I would say that's probably, that is true for us. Like, we didn't have a lot of churches closed. It's really interesting that the faithful givers that were there kept giving.
Yeah.
They did have to innovate. They had to talk to their people more. When they're streaming a service, you have to talk about how to give online a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Not just at the end. You got to talk about it at the beginning, the middle, and the end of service. Just as an aside, just a funny comment. In that same survey, there was this report that 7% of all the churches surveyed met stiff resistance as it related to churches using technology and implementing technology more. 7%. Now, if you've done research in the church world before, 7% is a very interesting number, because whenever it comes up, we always laugh about it, because 7% of Americans also believe that the moon landing was not real. So we always like to say, if 7% shows up on something, it's just 7% of people are always going to be against something or not believe it.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to be strange. So
they're going to take the counter argument to everything.
That's right. But I think what's interesting about that is I think people adopted it, and the majority of people adopted it because it's the way of life now. So we saw people innovate. Before the pandemic, we had hit 400 churches opening in 1 year. I mean, the reality is it did slow us down a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality. But like last year, I went to several online launches. So what would happen traditionally is you launch in person first, and then later down in your life cycle, you would have an online campus or do something like that, or you might stream online. What was happening in last year, people were launching online and figuring out how to gather, if they could, gather in smaller groups later.
Right. Like meet at the park, or maybe meet in the backyard.
Absolutely.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Or meet in someone's home with mask, groups of 4 or 5.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I interviewed a church planter named Tyler Hagan. We did yesterday. And what's interesting is they're still closed down. He's in Oakland, California. And they're still doing online services. They've started meeting again a little bit. But what he said something very interesting. This is kind of our second lesson. He said, yes, we did innovate. We got everything up and running. All the digital tools were running, but we still couldn't meet in person, and that was holding them back. But he said, what we lost in in-person meetings, we gained in discipleship ground. He said, so we might only be 2 years old, but we're like a 10-year-old church as it relates to discipleship, because we were able to meet with our people via Zoom, online meetings, all of these. They were leaning into discipleship. I heard many, many pastors say, well, we're going to care for the people we had. Every congregation member got a phone call from a pastor on staff. They checked on them. So discipleship actually went up. I mean, in-person gatherings went down for sure, but discipleship went up. We're pleased with that. We're pleased with that.
How did people, Matt Plott asked the question, which is kind of on my mind too. How did these church plants build the awareness? Like, because usually you'll have like a launch day, and there's a lot of, promotion and marketing and outreach and community engagement that goes on, right, for the launch, because you're building up towards this big launch. How did churches launch digitally, and how did they build that momentum kind of in an online environment?
A lot of social media push. And we kind of started thinking, so some churches would do before COVID, pre-COVID, we would do soft launches and hard launches. Another way to say hard launch would be like your grand opening. Well, we added a third phase, and that third phase is an online launch. So the first before your soft launch would be an online launch.
Okay.
So we've had a guy down in Texas, for example, in San Antonio. His online launch lasted a year before he did a soft launch, and now he's done a hard launch. Okay. So he looked at the online launch as a way of of building the team, building community.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would do things like whoever engaged with them on social media became their pool of people that they would start marketing to.
Right.
They would do things like prayer campaigns. Hey, and then they would boost their social media footprint in their area. And for example, if they did an outreach for prayer, so instead of going and handing out water bottles at a community run or a jog or something like that, we saw some people doing prayer campaigns where, hey, we're here to pray for you. Submit a prayer request. Here's a quick little form. And man, they've got a couple hundred people doing that in the community.
Wow.
And they would reach out to them. And that's how they did that. It was hard. I mean, it's not.
It's new. It's like going to the gym and you never worked out before and you got to go. It's
That's
all
right.
brand new, right? You got to figure it out.
But word of mouth was still there.
Yeah.
So if you had a core team before COVID, before it launched, then you could spread it. And a lot of times it was the core team members. This is not something that we, write about a lot, but generally speaking, we say for every core team member you have, they should be bringing 3 people to your church for every core team member. Right. So what we talk about is growing that core team. So we did see that the larger the core team, the larger the launch would be. Right. Now, there were some parts of the country, though, Frank, that were still doing in-person launches. We went to 2 last year that had between 300 and 400 people out on their launch day.
That's crazy. I just want to comment real quick. I love you kind of went through it, but this using social media, using the internet, and you mentioned somehow somebody came up with the idea of like do a prayer request. Yep. And you create like a simple form on, if you're a Tithely customer, you can create it on the Tithely products, but you could also just create a type form or a Google form or something really basic. Yep. And you've got this submit your prayer request form, and then you maybe post that on Facebook and then put a little bit of advertising money behind it to boost your posts on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and some other places. And it's just a simple like, hey, if you need prayer today, submit this form, let us know what you want us to pray about. And you're running those ads just to your target area. So just your couple of zip codes or something like that. So I think that's a really clever way to like run ads and, connect with people. If they submit it, they're probably people that are searching for faith, or maybe they're Christians that haven't found a home. Like there's just all kinds of things that might come in, but what a great way to kind of capture names and emails of people in your community for your digital outreach. I wanted to highlight that. I think that was a great idea.
I'll give you another one. We still had churches doing Meet the Pastor nights, and it was just on Zoom.
Yeah.
And we saw several pastors of new churches saying, hey, we're going to have a Meet the Pastor, a Q&A with the pastor. Mm-hmm. Bring your friends, here's the Zoom link, invite them. There's some funny stories too with that, because sometimes these Zoom links that are like, you can join if you have the link, they would get like these trolls in there and they would start.
Especially if they're posting it on social media and it's open,
But for the most part, it went well. But again, it was using technology not as an end in of itself. It's just a means.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we gathered from 2020 is you've got to use this as a way to gather the people, to still invest in them relationally. It's very, very important.
Yeah. So let's spend a few minutes kind of here at the end. What's it going to look like this year, especially, I don't know, maybe mid-year, vaccines are rolled out, we've hit this kind of critical mass and things are reopening over the next few months, right? As that starts to happen, how are you guys going to take your learnings from the pandemic and kind of what that taught you, and what's it going to look like going into, mid 2021 and beyond?
Well, what's interesting is now we teach to digital first, online. That is a part of the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. It's not the icing on the cake. It's a part of the infrastructure. So, Tithely has been an incredible partner for all of our church planners. Yeah. Our church planners just always, they go with Tithely because They can get a website,
Yeah.
they can get messaging, they can get giving, and they can get an app. And nowadays, there's this little thing that Tithely Apps has that I just love. You can forward the app to someone in your contact list if you have their phone number. Share this app.
Right.
I'm telling you, Frank, I don't know what y'all are doing over there and who's cooking up all this stuff, but think about it. The people in my phone are the people I'm close to.
Right.
So if I'm launching a church and I'm out in the community, I'm getting someone's phone number. Hey, let me just share with you a little bit about my church. You can see it on my app.
Yeah.
It's not going to cost you anything, whatever. You just download it and it's great. And they can see any video I post. I can create a welcome video to my church and I can send them that app and it's right there.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's such a good idea too, because you could create your app in such a way, especially if you're doing a church plant, like where right when you open it, it's kind of really focused on that new person. Right.
Yes.
So welcome video, a little bit about us, where we're going to meet. Like you could just really tailor.
Yeah.
And you can basically go like, hey, launch team, one of your tools for outreach is just to share the app via sending a text message to a friend or to a contact. Just share the app, because as soon as somebody downloads it, they're going to kind of get the welcome and they're going to meet some of the team.
That's right.
They're going to get that experience right there. That's another really cool idea.
So it's just ways that our church planners are taking what you guys do at Tithely and we're sort of manipulating it for our own purposes. Because I know the heart of Tithely. I mean, the apps are so robust. I realize that 80% of it is really for members, for people that are bought into the church. I get that. But when you're forced into quarantine and you can't meet, being able to text somebody something like that is it's sort of it lets people know that you're serious about this church plant. This is not just a group of people meeting in my basement or something. This is like a legit thing. And it's sharp, it's professional. So that's one of the things we do. And I think moving ahead, we're planning on a really strong fall. I think a lot of people have kicked we call it kicking the can down the road. I mean, they were planning on launching fall of last year and they've pushed it back to 2021. Yeah. And so we're pretty optimistic. I'm not sure that we'll be back where we were pre-COVID, but the numbers are coming back. We're very happy about it.
Yeah, that's cool. So I just got to throw this on screen. There's tons of great comments. Thanks guys for just your participation today, for everyone watching. But here's a cool one. Mark Becker, been a church plant for 2 years now, and we've seen growth over COVID. Tithely is how we handle everything. So love that, Mark. Both the growth and the plant and the fact that you're a Tithely customer. It's a great story. So Mike, just before we wrap up, where can folks go that are looking for additional resources? They're thinking about planting, or maybe they're just a small church looking to grow. Like you guys have a ton of great resources. Where can folks go?
Well, let me just talk. First of all, if you want to plant a church and you want our help, it's a very easy website. iwanttoplantatchurch.com. iwanttoplantatchurch.com. There's a quick 5-question survey, and it will send you right to us. It'll let us know what kind of church you're thinking about planting, or maybe what God's put in your heart. iwanttoplantatchurch.com, and that'll send you right to us. I also have to say, while I'm on, Frank, and we're kind of closing up here, thank you to Tithely for all of the great resources and the generosity toward our church planters. We really appreciate it. You're helping expand the kingdom. So thank you, and the whole Tithely family.
Amen. And hey, just another quick comment. Great insight. Really appreciate the comments.
Yeah, that's great, Paul.
House Church in San Fran, 100% online presence. Very cool. And shout out, I happen to know Paul very well. Good buddy of mine. So guys, this has been great. Mike, thank you so much for sharing just a little bit. Everybody watching live, again, give Mike some love, say thanks in the comments, give the show a like, and Mike will send as many people over to the Church Multiplication Network as we can.
Thank you so much, Frank. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, man. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, bro.